7 of us kids in the car with Dad, because she didn't drive a car. He took her to this meeting, and I remember the man of the house came out, and he didn't have a big family, and he saw all of us kids, and he said to my dad something about this big family. And my dad, I can remember him saying this, I wouldn't take $1 million for any one of them, but I wouldn't give you a penny for another one.
That's good.
Yeah.
And how many kids were there?
Well, I was the oldest of 10.
10. So he had 10 kids in the car?
No, they weren't all. Mother didn't have that many then.
The time?
I bet there were 5 or 6.
What kind of car did you have?
Well, first they had an old Model T.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah, sure.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
Then a Model A.
Okay.
I remember that.
Okay. Huh.
We had to bus our rides to go. I went to country school the first 2 years, and then he found somebody, a Catholic living in the neighborhood, that wanted to send their kids to Catholic school. So they pooled the rides and took these kids to town. So here was this little girl, 7 years old. I was in 3rd grade by then, and a board at the nuns. They used to keep boarders. They had 2 dormitories upstairs, one for boys and one for girls.
Okay.
Way apart from each other. And
Right.
there's this little, I think of that. How in the world did I handle that at only 7 years old? Those nuns were kind of tough.
Were they strict?
Well, our parents were spending hard-earned money to get us there, and we'd better eat everything that was on our plate.
Right.
So when the nun would walk around the room, there were a dozen of us boarding, and of course I was scared to death, you know. But the nun was called to the kitchen for something or other, and there was nobody there to supervise it. Will you eat my cabbage for me, and I'll eat your, you know. And then the next year, Kathleen started school, and she was only in 1st grade, so she and I both had to stay. We boarded a couple years, and then finally, I guess my parents were able to handle this, work it out with going back and forth. So even all through high school, we always shared rides going to school. Mm-hmm. Once we had to share rides with a guy, his last name was Korn. And he had an old car that didn't have windows. It had flaps that buckled down, you know.
Yeah.
And he was a guy, when it was summertime, we had the flaps open, of course. And I was so embarrassed to ride in this old crappy car. Right. But he waved at everybody we met. Oh.
Yeah.
And one time I got sick during the night, and there was a nun. This room had 2 beds here and another bed here and a little alcove there with the bed. Kathleen and I slept in that little alcove. There was a bathroom. Then there was 2 rooms behind that yet. This great big room was divided into 3 rooms, and a nun had one of those rooms. So 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock came along. You better shut up and not be talking anymore.
Yeah, they can hear right.
Yeah. And the 2 high school or older girls got to have this other private room. And it was an outside back house that we had to go to. It had half a dozen stalls on this side for the girls, and on that side was for the boys. And, I went through 2 depressions. In the 28, when I was a little girl, it was a bad depression. My dad was buying our farm, and he had to let it go back to the loan company. And it was tough. I wore hand-me-down clothes to school, but like I said, we always had plenty to eat. At the farm, my grandmother owned that farm. That's where she lived with my dad, and my dad did the farming for her. And then one time Aunt Amelia and Dad were out one night. They both lived there, and there was a horse and buggy in the yard. And jokingly, they said, gee, Mom must have a boyfriend. And by golly, she did.
Really? Really?
And she got married finally again to a 2nd time. And then she moved to town. And she married a guy that had some money. And so my dad worked his tail off. Somehow or other, I guess Grandma and the loan company owned the farm. and she had to pay this loan company so much every year, I suppose, for the rent.
Yeah.
And my dad just worked his tail off, and here we were. Mother was having more kids and family to support. And my Uncle Will lived at Early, and a farm came up for rent that was share rent. You didn't have to pay. You just shared the crop, so much of the crop. And that seemed to be less expensive than when you had to pay cash.
Right.
And easier to do. So he said, Al, and that's when I was a senior, said, Al, my dad was Al, this farm is up, it's got a nice home, it's a this lady lived in Storm Lake, her name was Mrs. Frericks. Anyway, oh, my dad, he cried when he left that farm, because he'd lived there about 30-some years with Grandma and then with all of us, you know. Right. And we moved, he just felt terrible he felt like he was betraying his mother, not helping her, because then she had to get another renter that wouldn't have been near as lead. But my uncle just said, you've got to start thinking of your family, Al. You can't be helping mother. They didn't say mom back then, mother all the time. And so we moved to Early, and my folks, that's where I met Beans. I think that was the time Santa Claus, or maybe the time Santa Claus, I know for sure Santa Claus came the time we came up one Christmas Eve. And that was the year I needed a new coat. And of course, Beans used to say that I was too tight. I hated to spend a heck of a lot of money. But, I grew up poor, and money was important. Yeah. Anyway, Thanksgiving time, coats would still go on sale. And I had a coat that I've still got it in the closet. I don't wear it anymore. It was part fake fur and part leather. Okay. Pretty coat. Yeah. And I saw this coat that I really liked. But it was way over $100. I just can't afford that. And the price would come down. Every time I'd go to Storm Lake, we had to go to Storm Lake often because we didn't have a grocery store anymore. And so every time I'd go to Storm Lake, I'd go in and look at that coat. Yeah. I'd come home and say, well, I didn't get the coat. It still costs too much money. So one day, Sue said, Dad, Mom really wants that coat. Why don't you get it for her for Christmas? He said, okay. So he gave her the money for the coat. Okay. I didn't know a thing about it. Right. He had an awful hard time surprising me to begin with. Yeah. So he did that work. And Santa Claus brought the coat. Nice. I cried.
Did you really?
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I wore it for 7 years. Yeah. I loved it. And so I've still, like I say, I've still got it. I kept part of it because he gave it to me.
Yeah, I hear you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, because I knew he made the dollhouse.
Oh, yes.
That was nice. Yeah.
That was a deal. He said, Sue, you were in Storm Lake. Yeah. And she said, do you think, Dad, I was teaching. She said, do you think, no, I believe I worked at the library then. I was through teaching. She said, do you think Dad would make Laura and Michelle, well, it was mostly Michelle because Laura was a baby, a dollhouse? And I said, I'll look at the library and see if I can find a plan.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I did. I found a plan, so he'd do anything for Sue,
Yeah, yeah.
So he made this dollhouse, and I helped him. We had leftover linoleum, and we had leftover carpet. Yes. And I said, don't put glass in the windows. That might break, and they'll get cut. But I made curtains.
Yeah, I saw curtains.
Uh-huh. And when he got all finished, he looked at me, and he said, don't ever ask me to do this again. It was a bigger job than he thought. Oh. So you were going to have Santa Claus at your house. Okay. And so we brought it up in a pickup, evidently.
Must have,
because we couldn't get it in the car. Yep. And had it covered. So they made Michelle go upstairs when Santa Claus was to come. And when she came down, she had to come downstairs blindfolded, and here was this dollhouse. Huh. See, I wanted to be a teacher, But you could only teach in a country school. And to me, that was discrimination. Country kids don't need a teacher with as much education as in town.
Right. That's a good point.
Uh-huh. And I had a boy down in the Levy Township that I'd see him many years after he was married. He'd tell Beans, that's the best teacher I ever had.
Yeah, that's cool.
He was quite the guy. He ended up in the nursing home in the hall across the room from Beans.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
The first 2 years I taught the homeschool. I got $40 a month.
So,
My dad made me pay my mother $5 a month because I was living at home now.
Okay, all right.
She saved it. She got $45 when the year was up. She bought a Congolian rug for the dining room.
Oh, nice. Cool.
I only had 3 or 4 grades in the country school. I only had 5 pupils. It wasn't fun at all. It was boring.
You gotta put one kid to work.
Yeah.
And then you gotta put another kid to work, and then.
But they learned from each other.
Oh.
Hearing this class, they were sitting right here while I was teaching this class.
Right.
They learned from each other. If they didn't get it last year, maybe they could catch on,
Okay.
And I taught 2 years there because it was hard to get a school. Nobody wanted you. You didn't have experience.
Right.
Besides that, I was a Catholic. Not everybody, some people did back then, didn't. We've all become more ecumenical through the years, thank the Lord.
Yeah.
So then after 2 years, Kathleen was old enough to teach. She got normal training too at Odebolt. So I had to find a different school. Well, we found a man who was a Catholic that was director of their school down in Levy Township. That time, I had about 16 pupils then in all the different grades.
Same thing.
8 grades.
Just you?
What?
Just you?
Just me. I never was so busy in my life.
Yeah, right.
Had to carry with the water. Kids had to go to the neighbors and get a bucket of water.
For what?
To drink.
Really?
We didn't have bathrooms.
So where would you go? You got an outhouse?
Yeah, in the country school. And had to make my own fire, had a hot belly stove in the country school.
What did you use the fire for?
It was cold in the winter time.
Okay, all right, well that makes sense. Okay. Where was the school at?
It was, I lived about a quarter of a mile and I walked. I stayed at some neighbors, some Roths.
Okay.
There's their name. And then we got, the last year I had school because it was way down. It was a long, good many miles for my dad to come and get me on Friday nights after school. Beans would take me on Sunday nights after we had a date to where I was living with people. I had to pay him $12 a month is all I paid.
So you lived next to the school?
Yeah, about a quarter of a mile.
Where was the school at?
And out in the country.
Where at?
Well, every 2 miles there was a country school for the country kids.
Yeah. So do you remember where it was at?
It was down by Wall Lake.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
So, you're going to be buried next to Grandpa?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We have and we one time when we had a little more money, we bought a stove.
Okay.
It isn't anything fancy, but it's a stove with our names on it. And Sue was madder than a hornet. She said, "I suppose you put the dates on it too."
So his stone is there.
Yeah,
And
it's
then
just a flat stone.
Oh, it's a flat stone. And then you're going to add your name to the bottom of it?
My name is on it already without a date.
That's kind of eerie.
I know I'm going to die someday.
I am too.
Well, sure.
I know, but still, that's kind of...
We're ready for it.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that not all of me is going to be there anyway, just my body. My spirit, I hope, will go to heaven.
Yeah. So, how do you want to be remembered?
Pardon?
How do you want to be remembered?
Oh, I don't know. Just that I enjoyed life and family is important to Beans and me always.
Yeah.
That's what he said. He said that's why he joined the Catholic Church, because he didn't believe in raising a family with 2 religions.
Yeah.
And he made a darn good convert. He contributed. Oh man, he really contributed to that church. But then, and when they die, you remember all the good things. I know sometimes I eulogize him too much, probably, because he had his faults, but he was a really good guy.